Then 1 second, I will start on YouTube first. And I think we should be live. That's perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of the EuroWeb Book Corner. It's the 6th edition already. And this is a very special edition, as you can see from the camera on our colleague Agata Ulanowska's site. This is the first hybrid edition of the EuroWeb Book Corner, dedicated to the recent book Ancient Textile Production from an Interdisciplinary Perspective, which was published in Springer this year in the collection Interdisciplinary Contributions to Archaeology. We are very, very fortunate to have the editors of this volume with us today. So I will be very brief. I will just introduce our 4 guests, our 4 editors for this volume, and then they will let you know a little bit about how this book came about, what are the contents, and what they have gained from this process of editing this wonderful book that really highlights, as we will certainly discuss during this event, just how much textile research and research on ancient textiles in particular is a very mature and very interesting interdisciplinary field of research. So to introduce our guests and the editors of the book that we are discussing today, in order, by the book cover order, we have with us Professor Agata Ulanowska from the University of Warsaw, Professor of Aegean Archaeology at the Faculty of Archaeology of Warsaw. Her research focuses, as I'm sure all of you know, on the dynamics of textile production in the Aegean during the Bronze Age. And specifically in recent years, she has been developing the quite amazing project Textiles and Seals, which has recently concluded with amazing results, which we have heard a lot about, and we will still hear for years to come for sure. And also, I think it's super important to mention in this context that she is the chair of the Cost Action EuroWeb, which sponsors this book corner. She is our beloved leader. So thank you very much, Agata, for joining us. We also have with us Karina Grömer. She's the vice head of the Department of Prehistory of the Natural History Museum, Vienna. Her research interests within the field of textile archaeology are very wide-ranging, and everybody knows about Karina's work. Her work covers textiles and dress cultures in Central Europe, mostly from prehistory to medieval times, although perhaps with a particular focus on Bronze and Iron Age textiles, including, of course, the amazing assemblages from the Hallstatt and Dürrenberg salt mines in Austria. She is also the vice chair of the Cost Action EuroWeb, so we are very well represented, EuroWeb, here at the highest level. So thank you very much, Karina, for joining us tonight. And we also have with us Vanden Berghe, which is a conservation scientist and a researcher at the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage in Belgium, where she is the head of the Textile Research Lab. Among other aspects, her research focused on the scientific analysis of ancient and historical textile dyes. So again, a very interesting field of interdisciplinary research and collaboration within textile studies. And finally, we have also with us Magdalena Öhrman, who describes herself as an archaeologically inclined Latinist, something I absolutely love. I love this description. She's a senior lecturer in classics at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David, and her research focuses on Roman textiles, their technology, and the organization of production as reflected on classical sources. Thank you so much to the 4 of you for joining us today and for presenting this amazing, amazing book. And I will now give the floor to you. I think Agata will start. And thank you to all of those who are joining here in Zoom and also those following on the EuroWeb YouTube channel. And now the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have to unmute yourself, Agata.
Thank you. Thank you guys for this technical help. So now I hope that you can both see me, hear me, and see the presentation. Great.
Yes.
Okay, Franziska, thank you for this very nice introduction. So you already know that we are pretty much interdisciplinary team. So that's why we are interested in interdisciplinary perspective to textiles. And I will start the story back. I will try to hide it. To jest możliwe. No trudno. It's impossible. I wanted to improve the way how the presentation is displayed in the room. Okay, but I'm not going to be distracted by anything more. So the story of this book goes back to EAA conference, the last pre-pandemic one in 2019 in Bern, where with the team, 3 editors and Jana Dyer, who unfortunately could not join us for editing the book, decided to propose a session about ancient textile production from an interdisciplinary approach. And you can see that title is nearly identical than the title of the book. The last one was improved by one of our external reviewers at the very end of book production. And when we've been preparing for this session, we've been already approached by Springer, by Christy Liu, who was the editor for interdisciplinary approaches to contributions to archaeology series. And she suggested that it's a good topic to be published in form of the book. So we were sort from the very beginning prepared to end up with a publication. For this initial approach with the session, we wanted to look at different aspects of textile archaeology, and it's really very scientific research field in archaeology. So we've been wondering about human modifications of plants and wool, research on raw materials, basic textile analysis of dyes and dye stuffs, research on textile tools, socioeconomic background of textile production, about big data in textile ecology, multidisciplinary research projects. But we aim to try to answer how textile ecology can respond to global challenges and grand challenges for ecologies. And we've been pointing out to several areas which we thought can be relevant, like access to cultural heritage. We are aware that textiles are quite fascinating for the general public, and we thought we can use it in our publication. We're also noticing the meaning of the fact that many textile techniques and skills belonging to intangible heritage have a very long tradition and actually can be derived from very ancient times. And of course, we've been also thinking about responsible use of resources, which is a huge topic now, and identity, mobility, and integration, which can be expressed by clothing, but also by textile production itself. Another important impact on this book had a paper which has been published in 2010, and it was co-authored a paper of great promoters of textile research. These were Eva Andersson-Strand, Karin Margarita Frey, Margarita Gleba, Ulla Mannering, Marie-Louise Nosch, and Irene Skulls. And it was a paper called Old Textiles, New Possibilities. So with several issues which were arisen in this paper, such as bringing textile studies into the mainstream archaeology, interweaving multidisciplinary approaches and researches, attracting interest from the general public, inclusion of early career researchers, inclusion of craftspeople. We wanted to see how it changed in 10 years' time. And it changed so much that we were able to produce a book actually instead of a paper. So I think this book also represents the huge growth in textile studies. So with this volume, we wish to offer a concise guide to current impact of textile ecology on the scholarly perception of the past. We were especially focusing on consumption, meaning, use, and reuse of textiles and dyes. And we were also aiming to demonstrate the importance of interdisciplinarity by showcasing several interwoven approaches to environmental and archaeological remains, textual and iconographic sources, archaeological experiments, and ethnographic data. And we wanted to be as more inclusive as possible. So the geographic area covers Europe, the Mediterranean, Near East, Africa, and Asia. And the chronological span is also deliberately wide, including materials dating from the 6th millennium BCE to mid-14th century CE. The book is divided into 5 parts, and now I will be happy to say a few words about each part, showing some highlights from the content of the book. So the first part is just the introduction, where there is our introduction, and it's a little bit more than just simple introduction to the volume, because we also were quite reflective in that what we wrote. So we expressed also our feelings about textile ecology nowadays. And then we have a great paper, Old Textiles, New Possibilities 10 Years On, submitted by a few of the original authors of this journal article, Eva Andersen-Strand, Ulla Mannering, and Marie-Louise Noche. It's very reflective, it's very personal, it's also very interesting, and it also shows how their approach has changed through the last 10 years. So, for example, they say that in 2010 papers, definition of a textile as the main stress was on textiles as resources, technology, and society. But now, 10 years later, it can be challenged and alternatively defined as individual choices, skills, and tastes. So it's kind of a progress going into more detailed look at ancient textiles. And now I think I'm giving the floor to Ina. Ina, are you there?
Ina has been having some issues connecting. She sent us an email saying that she can join us, but she is not able to unmute herself. I don't know if she has solved the issue. I don't think she's here at the moment. Oh, yes. Ina, not you haven't solved it yet, right? No, I don't think so, Agata. I'm sorry.
Okay, so Karina, do you have an idea? Shall we go further, or would you like to say a few words about these 2 papers, especially that you're the co-author of one of them?
Karina, you have to unmute yourself, sorry.
I think Ina should do the dying thing whenever she is able to do it. But we can go on to the next chapters, okay. And then switch back whenever Ina can do.
Okay, great.
Yes. For the part 3, we had the interdisciplinary approaches to the textile tools, and what was so fascinating for me is that to what level of standardization we got because when I started to study archaeology in the 1990s, usually textile tools have been only been placed somewhere in the appendix as other stuff. And then it was just described as, oh yes, and 2 or 3 spindle wheels have been found there as well. And so now what we have now is a real standardization on how to describe textile tools, how to work with them, and also a standardization on what information we can get out of textile tools. all of this, of course, is based on the work by the wonderful CTR in Copenhagen, who did a lot of set standards, told us how to do, also gave the clues on how to deal with the big data analysis. As we know, since Christian Christiansen, big data analysis is really the clue for modern archaeology. We cannot do without. And since, the last 2 decades, a lot of things happened in the description of textile tools, especially spindle wheels and loom weights. And this embraces, the whole Mediterranean and, Europe. What we see in our chapters about the interdisciplinary approaches to textile tools is that we can see a lot of work with the items from the early Neolithic in North Macedonia, but also some discussions on, what is about tradition versus invention, what's about the horizontal ground loom and the vertical warp-weighted loom. How can we see that? What clues do we have on the different loom types from the archaeological evidence? Because this is always a problem, because especially for all of those material stuff, the wooden items you don't have, you just have the clay items, but they are not really representative, or are they? And all of those discussions bring us really, really much more further than, it was done, 30 or 50 years before. But also other stuff like weaving combs, for example, where you see this figure 9.2. It's also something that usually was not discussed. And what I really, really loved was Magdalena Öhrman's paper on the literary sources on worn textile tools, because also to include this kind of information, not only the tools themselves and adding some specialist analysis on usewear or whatever, but bringing the data together. I think this is really the clue on how we can go on further to even a more deep perspective on what textile tools, textiles add to our knowledge on textile production, textile consumption in ancient times, in prehistory, and also in historic period. I think I will give the word back to Ina, because I think she came and she might talk about the dye stuff analysis, because this was also one thing that we included into our book.
Ina's sound is currently on, but we can't hear her. I don't know. Are you there, Ina?
No, unfortunately, we do not hear Ina.
Yeah. So I think that the technical problem may persist yet.
Shall we continue and try again with the next, but I have problems with changing slides. It's not like, okay. So maybe I will start with part 4, then we will try again if Ina can be heard. If not, okay, she's like also kicked off or trying to rejoin. So if she won't be, Ina, can you say something now? Can we hear you now? No, it doesn't seem so. Okay, guys. So I would like to say a few words about part 4 of our book, which is about traditions and context, fibers, fabrics, techniques, uses, and meanings. And there is also one common thing in all papers which were gathered in this part together. It is experimental approach. So we have paper by Sabine Karg about lime-bust winding, know-how, labor input, and quantity needed for the production of 2 selected Neolithic finds, where she is discussing the tree bust, specifically the lime bust, and its importance in textile production in the 5th to 3rd millennium BCE in Circumalpine region in Europe. So this paper has a lot of this environmental approach, and indeed exploitation of lime bast might have had quite strong results on the climate at the time. And she also applies experimental archaeology while discussing the techniques of procuring lime bast, and she proposes that small brushes which were made of thorns, which were quite frequent finds in Neolithic wetland sites, and until now they had unidentified function, that they can be used actually as efficient tools for splitting tree bast into fine and regular strips. Next, we have two papers about flax and linen. First is by Deborah Cassuto, Andrea Orendi, and Itzhak Shai, Food for Thought or Threads for Weaving. Can we identify the uses for ancient flax seeds discovered in the southern Levant? And it's quite an issue if there is not a reference, like there are not reference samples. A lot of things have to be considered in order to decide whether the flax seeds are domesticated or not. And it's not super easy in case of charred flax, which are reduced anyway. And also another issue is the level of water in the environment, because as the authors argue, flax seeds are getting larger when there is a lot of moisture in the air and in the earth, and they are smaller. So it's not like one certain value which can give us an answer whether the seeds come from domesticated. Now we know that the flax is domesticated, but whether the seeds come from the flax which was used for getting oil or for getting fiber or for both. All this work has been done with regards to the seeds found at Iron Age, a site of Tel Burna. Now the next paper by Arit Shamir and Achim Lichtenberg and Oriental discusses a very interesting find. These are textile remains in a hoard of Alexander II Sabinus coins. And in this paper, a specific textile fragment, which is definitely recycled, was used to wrap coins and found as such. We know that this fragment was recycled because the authors argued that it was bleached. So bleaching is something which was characteristic for garments, not for like everyday technical textiles, so to say. So that suggests that it was cut from a garment. And then they try to compare the quality of this textile with the loom weights and other weaving and spinning tools which are available at this site. And this site is Tel Itzaba, which is a Beth Shean ancient Stetopolis. Now we have the quite interesting approach to Nubian open works. This is the contribution by Elsa Ivanes and Ulrika Mogdet, titled Unraveling the Threads of Nubian Open Works, New Inquiries on a Unique Textile Tradition from Meroitic Sudan. And we talk about 350 BCE to 350 CE. And these elaborate fringes are attested by actual textiles, as you can see on the slide. But what is also interesting in iconography, which is not a quite usual thing to find the same thing in earth, like in archaeological context and in iconography. And together, Elsa, together with Ulrika is a weaver, brought hats and hands together, and they have suggested how this open work could have been made. And then we have the paper of, we're still in Africa, the paper from Julia Galliker and Helga Mautendorfer about interdisciplinary methods and new perspectives on inscribed textiles, a case study of Christian Tiras. And they are discussing textiles with inscriptions in Greek and Coptic, which is the Christian version of Tiras, dating to the late antique and early Islamic periods in Egypt. And Tiras is here used as a term designated for messages on cloth. And in this paper, they're using the shroud from Kassel Museum of Archaeology as a case study. They're discussing whether this is the product of professional industry, what it might have been produced, what is specific for it. And then the last paper in this section is paper by Ronia Lau. She's the young researcher, as were the other authors from part 3, and she contributed chapter about weaving experiments with the rigid handle and woven in metal spirals from Siksala and Auleya technique, which she tried to reconstruct using rigid handles. This technique is dated to circa 9th to 15th century, and it's not only from Estonia, but it's also present in Lithuania, Latvia, and Russia, so quite close to our country textile tradition. And she is mostly focused on the technique of production, but she's also interested in written sources and folk beliefs related to these bands, which seem to be highly symbolic in many aspects. So this is part 4, and now I will ask again about Ina.
Hina has sent me a message saying that whenever she tries to turn on the video and the sound, she gets completely blocked. So we can, I don't know if she wants to try again, but if not, I think we can just, she said that we can just go on.
Okay.
Hina? No, I don't think it's sorted.
Okay, Karina, would you like to say a few words?
On the dice or the part 5?
About,
okay,
and then we'll go to part 5.
Okay. Just a few words, because I'm not a specialist for that. Of course, in a book on interdisciplinary perspectives on textile archaeology, something on dye stuff analysis is not allowed to miss. That cannot be, because especially for dye stuff analysis, a lot of new methods and whatever was developed in the last 20 years, and so we had 2 wonderful contributions. One was about the purple and what aspects and details from written sources to literary sources, and especially from the purple shell itself, from the chemistry and the chemical analysis. That was the focus of the paper from Zvi Koren, who is, as a chemist, also a specialist in this task. And then a case study from textiles with dyes that came from Cherubat in Iran, was done by Ina Vanden Berghe and myself. I just contributed the archaeological part, but Ina and her wonderful lab did all of this analysis on the dyes and dye stuffs from the Cherubat textiles. They are from a salt mine that is comparable from how the textiles are preserved with the Hallstatt stuff, and are also somehow contemporary, because they are from the 4th century BC, that is Sassanid, Achaemenid, and then we also have textiles from the 4th century CE, that is the Sassanid period. That means the old and the new Persian kingdom, more or less, that you just have something in mind. And they really used wonderful dyes, and Ina tried to put all of that into the context of what we know on dyes, on dye stuffs, and on colorful patterns in the Eastern Mediterranean in this time frame. Yes, and then we will switch to part 5, because
I'm doing my best, but okay.
Because after I'm just keep talking. Magdalena, do you want to fit in with something?
Please go ahead.
Okay, you come later. Okay, for part 5, we just thought it would be interesting to also have a look on the digital tools. This is something that was, really evolved in the last centuries and got even more important since the pandemic. When we wrote this book and did this book and did the EAA session, we did not know all of that, how the digital communication would evolve even within few months, because there was no other possibility to communicate and so on. And to do all of this, to get all of this digital competence, it's a challenge. And I think for all of us, it was a challenge. But even before 2019, we had a big approach on digital tools and how to make the textile tools, and all of the knowledge that we gathered together in this big data analysis, how to make it accessible to the public. And there is this wonderful paper by Agata Ulanowska on investigating the relations between textile production and seals and sealing practices in the Bronze Age Greece, because she did a big project, that database on textiles and seals at the Faculty of Archaeology, University of Warsaw, and she collected various types of evidence. The sealing press textile tools, the imprints of the textile products, and so on. And then she created this database, which now will be integrated into the digital tools of EuroWeb. But I think she will talk about that later on. Yes, and I think this is really the way on how we should go on further, because the times when textile scholars were sitting in their silent chambers and just working for themselves and publishing on paper, I mean, they are over. We have to interact, we have to collaborate, and this is really important, that our textile society, our how the friendship of, how is it called, of the Lord of the Rings, the companionship of textile research can go on. And one of the digital tools, if you don't have database, you just have to do digital data, digital images of the stuff that you have. And what we tried in our paper on the 3D visualization of the 2,400-year-old garments of the Saltman 4 from Jerobat in Iran is exactly that. We tried to do a 3D model on an avatar. We made an avatar of the garments. Of course, the first step was to analyze the garments themselves, but then they have been remodeled using digital tools. Sorry, and the digital tools came from the same computer apps that are used even in modern fashion industry to make things visible. And I think those things are really, really helpful, because you see exactly how the things are draping, because you cannot do that with the original artifact. You see where is the stress on the artifact and so on. And this was our small contribution to the task from the Jerobat textile research team. Yes.
Thanks. And now there will be just last slides, if I will manage to change. Oh, whoops. So in our introduction, we've been referring to like broadening this interdisciplinary approach and collaboration. And we're already aware about EuroWeb, the cost action already emerging, because it was 2020 when it started. And in the book, we already suggested that this might be project which forges new notions of inclusive European identity based on a shared heritage and experience of textiles and identity, generating a sense of belonging and social cohesion. And we also hope that this edited volume will be one of the contributors to make this vision possible. And now with the EuroWeb, which really develops very well, I think that we really bring a lot of new knowledge to textile archaeology and textile studies, because EuroWeb is not only about archaeology. And with this big project, we think that probably another book should be updating our book, like maybe in 5 years, because the research is developing now much faster. And we already see a lot of new results coming from our action. And I think this is all what we wanted to say. I stop sharing screen. Guys, would you like to add something? Magdalena?
Can I just come in really quickly and pick up on that sort of focus on the international development? Now, as colleagues will know who were involved in the work on this volume and in the original conference, I came in as an editor at a relatively late stage when Joe couldn't join, and worked a lot on the sort of editorial side on proofreading and so on. And what's really striking, and it comes through in your presentations as well, Agata and Karina, is how international we are. I think this volume shows even more than the original Old Textiles, New Possibilities, and the early volumes, say in the Ancient Textiles series with Oxbow, show how international we are. Look at the biographies of all of the scholars that are contributing to this volume. See how we have worked and how integrated we are across boundaries, not only in Europe, but beyond as well. I was really, really pleased that we had the papers that highlighted developments in Africa, for example, involved in this volume. So I think that's a signal of the strength of the field, how it has developed, that we have made sure that we keep in touch, that we integrate across boundaries so that the field can grow. And I think that's also clear in the interdisciplinarity in the papers that we have in this volume, that we work together. Textile scholars work together. We talk to each other, whether we are philologists or archaeologists or art historians. And that's beginning to flow over and be felt in our adjacent disciplines as well. I see it from my colleagues in my home institutions, where people will ask, okay, so I'm doing this straightforward archaeological survey. How can you tell me more about how to bring the textile angle into my material? And vice versa. I've had literary people ask me, can you give me some background on this textile reference? I don't understand it, but I realize now it's important. And I think we've really paved the way for that. But we also use each other's expertise within the field. You can see that in the co-written papers particularly. And that helps us tackle the really hairy technical stuff, like the dye analysis. It helps us take advantage of the highly technical advances on the digital side, for example, but it's practical things as well. It's the language variety that we have and take advantage of. In our field and in the list of participants and readers for this volume, there's always someone you can call on if you get a paper in a European language, in a language that you don't read yourself. There's always someone you can check with. if you need to understand the nuance. And that, I think, is what's going to take us into the next phase. So those were my little additions.
What I want to add here, thank you so much, Magdalena, is also the variety of scholarship, because we have really very early research career people, some of them students, also involved, and other highly recognized persons like Eva Andersson, for example, who works in the field since 30 years, longer than some of the other persons are even living in their lifetime. And I think this is also wonderful to have so many young people aboard and to give them the chance to be involved, to be involved in such a wonderful volume.
And I would also like to add my thanks to Magdalena, because her helpful hand at the very end of the editing process was like of the greatest importance ever. We've been like exchanging emails every 10 seconds for 24 hours. So really thank you for that. And the last thing which I would like to say are great thanks to Springer, which I think we can all recommend as a very easy to collaborate with publishers. So we really didn't have to think about money, which is like super important thing. And at all stages, all was super clear. They were very helpful. There is like still kind of technical editing, which is becoming quite unique nowadays. And the editor and the publisher also takes responsibility for the quality of the volume. You are allowed to introduce changes even in the last proof, which is also an issue for some publishers. So our experience with Springer was only the best. So we can also recommend this publishing house. Questions?
Yes, thank you so much to our speakers today, to the editors of this volume. And now we open the floor to anyone either online or in Warsaw that wants to make any questions or any comments on the presentation, on the volume, on the issue of interdisciplinary research in textiles. I don't see any comments online. If anyone wants, you can just unmute yourselves or raise your hands, whatever you feel is better.
No comments from the audience either, the live audience.
So if no one wants to say anything, I will just make a very quick note on my side, which is, as a relative newcomer to the textile field, I'm not a textile scholar really. I just started working more on this field since I've joined EuroWeb. The textile field always strikes me as such a particularly good example of interdisciplinarity and such a mature example of interdisciplinarity, because in other fields that I've touched upon in my research, like, I don't know, glass studies or pottery studies or archaeometallurgy, of course there is this search for interdisciplinarity, but there are some growing pains still in joining different discourses and different levels of different approaches, different disciplinary traditions, different languages even of research. And it really strikes me that textile studies are such a wonderful model that can be transported to maybe other fields, because in textile studies, I get the feeling that the data is really integrated and that dialogue really happens. It's not just someone doing historical analysis on one side and another person doing lab analysis on the other. So I don't really, it's something that is out of curiosity. I would like to understand better how this situation came along in the textile field, if it is because of it is a small field, if it is because of institutional linkages, the networking, how it came about. But I think that the core idea, and something that this book really illustrates very well, is just how much the textile field is an interdisciplinarity model that can inspire just how to do it, how to do interdisciplinary research with other materials and other kinds of archaeological artifacts. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that you want to add. I think Magdalena spoke very eloquently about it. Yes, Karina.
what I wanted to say is that this was really the idea from the beginning on, because when Lisa Bender-Jürgensen and Klaus Tidorf and also John Peter Wald started to do the NESAT series of textile conferences more than 40 years ago, I think, they started interdisciplinary, because you cannot understand textiles without talking to all of the other guys. I mean, you cannot understand the fibers as a classical archaeologist. You cannot understand even the context if you are just, I don't know, someone who is looking on text and so on. And so I think it just came naturally because of the a lot of gaps that we have, because there are a lot of holes in our knowledge, and so to fill it we had to bring it together. But I think it's also a good personal thing, and a human quality of all of us doing the textile studies, that this is possible, and that no one has the feeling that something is taken away from her or him. I mean, I had that when I worked together with Ina Vanden Berghe. Without her lab and her chemical experience, I could not do anything on the colorful, wonderful textiles from Jerebat, but vice versa. You have to cooperate. And I think textile people are always very, expressive and giving, as I learned to know a lot of them, and this is wonderful. Even going to a textile conference is like coming home, like coming to the family, and I love it. I really, really love it. And so the EuroWeb and all of the EuroWeb workshops, training schools, conferences, whatever it is a wonderful come together of friends, and this is a wonderful quality.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you so much. So does anyone else have comments or questions? I we don't have any questions on YouTube. We don't have any questions here on the chat. So I think that we can start to wrap up. I don't know if Agata or Karina, you want to add anything else before we close the session?
Okay.
Karina has the right idea.
Okay. There is like a comment from Kasia. Thank you, Kasia. And yeah, I think that we also deserve some wine here in the room. So I only like to say great thank you to all the visitors of today's book corner, and to my great co-editors. I think that this friendship part is really important in textile ecology, and it works super well. I totally agree, and I think it's also behind one of the things which is behind its successful development. And I'm again very sorry for Ina, who could not join. We are sorry not to see you this time, but technicalities. Okay, I think that's all from my end. And thank you, Francisco, for organizing this book corner very much.
No, thank you all for coming, and thank you all
Francisco.
for presenting your book. Thank you. Thank you all. I hope that there will be more EuroWeb book corners coming soon. There are already a couple of books that are earmarked for future editions early next year. Until Christmas, I won't bother with another book corner. But for next year, there are already a couple of books lined up. And in the meantime, if I may, on behalf of EuroWeb, also everyone that is a member and everyone that isn't too, please check our website, because we have a few things going on, a few call for papers open right now. There will be others open very soon too. So keep an eye out to our social media channels, keep an eye out to our website. There are always things popping up. So we hope to see you all very, very soon in another book corner or in some other EuroWeb event. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for joining, and have a lovely evening.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Mm.